Today, I'm going to show you how to build this snazzy looking app. Oh, and hey, I'd like to mention this video's sponsor, Skillshare.com. Now, it's a brand new year here in 2019, and Skillshare will help keep you learning and thriving as they offer 25,000 different classes in coding, design, business, and more. For instance, you're about to watch my Ionic crash course, but you could watch all these other Ionic courses at Skillshare to expand your knowledge afterwards. Skillshare is also super affordable with a subscription that only costs $10 a month, but if you're one of the first 500 of my subscribers to click the link below here in the description, you get the first 2 months free, so take advantage. All right, so you're probably wondering, what is this app and what was that thing at the beginning of the video that I showed you? Well, basically, I'm going to teach you Ionic 4, in a crash course sort of way, and in doing so, show you how to build this app. Now, I built this app out of necessity, really, or personal preference, really. And basically, when I go to the gym, I want to know quickly and easily, when I should start my next set. I don't like to go by feel because sometimes I rush it, So usually before I was using the standard timer or stopwatch app that came for Android, but that's not very good for my purposes. I thought I'd make something custom that is much better for my purposes. So basically at the top we have restoration, and if we click it, we'll see we have this cool little selector down here that allows us to specify the restoration in terms of minutes. Now, usually I'm around 1 minute and 30, and then as well as the seconds. So we'll put 30 right here, and then hit done, and then it gets reflected up at the top. And now what I can do is when I walk into the gym and I'm ready to start my routine or whatever, I can click play on this. And I'll do my set, and then when I'm ready to rest, I click up here, and this gives me a visual, sort of very cool looking radial SVG representation of my rest. And when it gets to around 100% full circle, I then know that I can start my next set, I can get done, I can keep pressing this, and this overall timer down here is just my overall workout duration. I kind of wanted to know that as well. So 2 separate things occurring here, and we're going to be learning a lot about Ionic in building something like this. All right, so before we begin, make sure to subscribe if you enjoy this, and you know you will. So make sure you do hit subscribe and the little bell notification icon to get notified when I upload new videos, which I'm doing all the time, every week. And also, you should understand first and foremost before you begin, you need to understand JavaScript, basic JavaScript. Also Angular. We're going to be using Ionic with Angular. You can use Ionic with Vue and React as well, but by default, when you use the Ionic CLI, it starts with Angular. So I do have a 100% free course on Angular 7, which is what Ionic 4 uses. So make sure you watch that if you don't have any clue about Angular. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. All right, so here I am in my command line. I'm using Commander CMDER. It's a console emulator for Windows. You can still use the regular command line or whatever. And hop into your code folder or wherever you store your code projects. And the first thing you're going to make sure you have, of course, is Node.js. You download that from nodejs.org. To see if you have it, node-v, just hit enter and it'll let you know. I haven't updated mine in quite a while, actually. But still, just download it, install it, reload your console, and you can run this command. And then we're going to use the Node Package Manager, which comes installed with Node, to install the Ionic command line interface. All right, so the way you do that is npm install or just -G for global, and then that will install it where you can access it everywhere on your machine, and then Ionic, and just hit enter. So I already did this just yesterday, so I have the recent version. You're going to make sure, even if you had it installed before, you want to have the latest version so that you're working with Ionic 4 and the latest version of Angular. Once that's done and you have that installed, then we can use the Ionic CLI to start a new project. So we can just type in Ionic start. And by the way, always refer to the documentation. Right here, there's a CLI installation page. It's going to give you different options of how to get started. And you can actually start with other commands like giving it a name, and then a default template, a starter template. But you could just type in what we did, which is Ionic start, and it will give you a couple prompts right here. So the first one, I'm going to call this just rest, maybe 2 R's, rester, for like rest between sets. I don't know. And then now we have the starter template option right here. So we can, by default, you can see it's on blank. You just use your keyboard up and down arrows. You can also have one that starts you off with a side menu scaffolding, or also a tabs scaffolding. All right, so it sets up, it gets rid of some of the boilerplate for you when you choose those. I'm just going to choose blank because we have a very simple project. We're not going to have multiple pages, and this seems to be just the best place to start. All right, it's also asking down here near the end of the installation if you want to install the Ionic AppFlow SDK and connect your app. You can learn more about that here. I'm just going to hit N for no. All right, and there we go. All right, so notice it does mention down here, get Ionic Dev App for easy device testing. So it's an app that you can install on iOS or Android that makes it easy for you to actually test your project on your mobile device while you're developing it. So you can try that out. And once we're ready to CD and into the project, and then I use Visual Studio Code. So being that we're in the current project here, I can launch it with code period. Visual Studio Code's a free code editor by Microsoft, very popular. It's what many people are using these days. And also, before we hop back into the code editor, also run Ionic serve. And if you were using the dev app, you would add a -dev app like this. But we're not going to do that. I'm just going to hit Ionic serve. And momentarily, it's going to build out the project, and it will launch the project in your browser, your default browser. So while I wait for it to do that, and by the way, here it goes, it still takes a little bit of time. It's waiting for it to bundle, and then it will show up here in the browser. And it should be here any second. And it'll just show you a default template, the starter template with some, default HTML and all that stuff. There it is. So as you can see, it doesn't look like it's in the context of a mobile app. We could hit Control-Shift-I, and now it's more in like an iPhone X, and this is what our very simple app so far looks like. All right, so we'll be referring back and forth to this, and there is live reloading, all in that good stuff that's worked in here. So let's talk about the project structure a little bit. First, we'll go down to package.json, and this lists all of our dependencies, and we can see that we have Ionic down here and also Angular. So when you start off by default with the Angular or the Ionic CLI, and you start a new Ionic project, it works with Angular by default. Now you can actually use Ionic with Vue and I believe React as well, but you would have to read the documentation about that. So we're just going to be using Angular, and I should definitely say, you need to know Angular, not need, but I really highly advise to actually learn Angular first before you hop into Ionic, because Ionic relies heavily on Angular or Vue or React, depending on which route you take. So fortunately for you, if you check out my channel, and go to a channel search, maybe if I can remember, I will put it in the description here on YouTube. I released a 100% free Angular 7 course, and as we can see, this is based on 7.2, just several months ago. So definitely check that. That should be that would get you far enough just to have a basic understanding, so that where you could be a little bit more comfortable working within Ionic. All right. We're basically always working within this source folder. So inside the source folder, we have our app. This is where our components go. And again, this is Angular specific stuff. App routing, that's all Angular routing. And then we could also see we have a home directory, and this is created by the CLI. And if we take a look at homepage.html, we'll see we have Ionic blank, and the world is your oyster. So if you look back to your browser, you'll see the same thing. Ionic blank, the world is your oyster. This is where you update all of that good stuff. So for our app, oh, by the way, where it says, like, you can see this is some default styling applied on here. If you're interested in, understanding where those are coming from and what else you can do in terms of custom, like not custom, but the predefined UI components here in Ionic, and you can see all these interesting HTML tags, go to the documentation right here. And this is ionicframework.com/docs, and just click on components right here, and you'll arrive at this page. They have a ton of them, and they're all the type of UI components that are made to look like native elements. You have your fab, the floating action buttons. You have a ton of stuff. So we'll be using some of these, but yeah, just understand when you want to use something. The way their documentation is set up is very nice. Sometimes they'll give you a preview of what it looks like, and then they have a usage showing the HTML right here that was necessary to create this. It will also show you properties and methods, and as well as any CSS classes that are you can use to customize them. All right. So again, we'll refer back to that. Now for our very simple app, I don't need a header. I don't need like a navigation at the top. I don't need the hamburger menu of any sort. So what I'm going to do is just delete this entire thing and hit save. So now once we save, you'll see the live reloading in action. It takes a little bit of time. You'll see its app updating, recompiling. It takes like 6-7 seconds or so. Any second now, this should go away. And there it is. Okay. All right. So now let's try to get change the background color, for instance. If we come down to our theme folder, we'll see we have a variables.sas file. And this is new in Ionic 4. They're using actual variables. These aren't SAS variables. These are native CSS variables. See, it's applied on a root selector element. And there's a primary, secondary, and tertiary. Is that how you pronounce that? I don't know. I'm stupid. Success, warning, danger, dark, medium, light. All right. So if you look at these all, they're basically different. They provide different shades of like the primary or secondary or tertiary colors, and you would think it might be a little bit. It's a little bit confusing because how would you change these values and know what these shade and tint values should be? Well, if you go over to the Ionic docs, there's a color generator. So if you go to guide and then come down here and click color generator, you'll find this page right here. And then you can specify a color, and then it will automatically provide you with the shade and tints, and then along with the code output down here. So let me show you how it's done. I know my color, primary color for this app isn't going to be blue. I want it to be kind of like this purplish color. So what we'll do is I'm going to go ahead and paste in, or not paste in rather, but it's going to be a specific color code, CD00FF. Now it automatically shows us a preview, which is really cool, and it sets up our shades and tints, and it also reflects those values down here from which we can copy it, because I know the only one that I changed was primary. So I'm going to take those initial declarations, copy them, and then just overwrite them right here, paste, and save. So now when we save this, and going back to the correct window, it's somewhere around here. There it is. This went from blue to purple or pink or whatever that color is. All right, so very, very cool. Let's change the background to black as well. And this is one of those things, there's no variable for the background, right? So what do? You go to Google, just like I did, and you type in Ionic for background color. And there is a result that just lets us know that there is a variable for it, although it's not in here. And that variable happens to be right here. So I'm just going to put it right here in the root, Ionic or Ion hyphen background hyphen color, and then just set it to black. And when we do this, this will update momentarily after it's done recompiling, and the background will be black. All right, so now what we'll do is I want to get in a circular progress bar. This is another one of those things or those times when I wanted to, I didn't know if one existed. I didn't know if one existed in terms of like an official Ionic component as one of those UI components. So I just went to Google and I typed in Ionic circular progress bar, and there are several different options that you can use that are that you can install through npm. The one that I found is relatively recent, and it has a lot of options. Is this one right here? Right here is ng circle progress. So there's a demo. It tells you how to install it, and that's exactly what we're going to do. So we're going to npm install circle progress, and it also shows you how to get it set up down here as well, but I'm just going to close it out for now. So we're going to go back to our console editor, or console command rather. All right. And by the way, I'm going to open up another console here. I'm going to go back into cd rester, code/rester. All right, and then I'm going to run that command. All right, so this initial one, I think this is in, I'm going to close this tab. This doesn't have anything to do with our project. So we just have this. I didn't want to have to stop this in order just to install this one. So there we go. That one's all stalled. So now we have to add it to our HomeModule TS file right here. All right, so first we import it at the top, and then we add it here to the imports array. And I'm taking this right from that circle documentation that I just closed out. So we add it at the bottom right after this one right here, or you could add it anywhere in the array, it doesn't matter. Put a comma, and right here. So ng circle progress module for root, and this lets you specify some defaults. And let me make sure I put this in here correctly. There we go. And one thing that I'm setting, this is all from, again, I copied and pasted this stuff, but I did add 3 properties on my own. Animation set to false, responsive is true, and render on click is false. So you may be wondering what that stuff is. I should not have closed out that package or thing right here, the documentation. If you come down here, you'll see that it has a ton of different options associated with this circular progress. So we have percentage, max percent, radius. You have a bunch of options, which is really cool for this little library. And it tells you, what they do. Some are obviously, they're self-evident. But those are the options that I set, so you can set those as well. Okay, so let's save that. And now, if we go back here, we'll see we have a usage example. Just copy it real quick. And then we'll go into our home page, HTML. We'll get all this. And we'll paste it in right here. All right, so let's go ahead and save that. And now, with any luck, it should update once it's done recompiling. There we go. How exciting is that? All right, and you can see it animated and all that cool stuff. So next, what we'll do is we're going to update this, and I'm going to update it with a bunch of other options, those options that I just showed you on the documentation. So instead of me just kind of describing exactly what's happening, I'm just going to paste this in right here. And then if you want to, you can pause this and then go through and specify, or make sure you have all the same options and values. The ones that are worth paying attention to is percent, notice that we're binding it to something called %. And this is a property that we're going to define in the component, which is right down here in this TypeScript file, home.page.ts. Also, max %, it means it's always going to be based on a 0 to 100 value, a percentage value. And also radius, that's the other important one, is set to another property that we're going to define called radius. All right, so radius will be basically 100%, and then percentage is going to be the active percentage that we'll set up in the component. So there's other things I'm doing, like show titles, show subtitle false. I basically didn't want to show anything in the center, which is what we currently see right here, like the progress. For me, in my use case for this app, I just didn't need, I don't care what the percentage is. All I cared is about having this visual representation that I can just set the phone on the floor when I'm at the gym, and I could see roughly, when I'm ready to do my next set. All right, and then just some other things, like where you can use a stroke gradient, which is really cool, and you can set those color codes here. Notice though, when it comes to the color codes, you're using a double quote and then a single quote inside, otherwise it won't work. But just experiment with it. So let's save that, and when we save it, you're going to see that it will go away, and I think we'll just have a tiny sort of circle in the middle with nothing happening. We also want to add a click event. All right, so again, this is where it helps to know and to understand basic Angular. So when somebody clicks on it, you're thinking, why would you want to click on the graphic or that SVG? Well, it's easy, it's big. That's what I want to tap every time I'm ready to start resting after a set is done. So click equals start time. We're going to create a function called start time. All right, so let's save that, and we're going to go back to our homepage.ts file. All right, now what I want to do is, actually before we get there, let's go back to our, up here. I want to show you, we basically need a way to let the user specify the amount of time that they want to rest between their sets at the gym. So nobody's resting more than like a minute-based value, so 5 minutes, 2 minutes, whatever. So we're going to have a way for them to specify the minutes and the seconds. For me, when I'm at the gym, it's usually around 1 minute and 30 seconds between the sets. So initially I experimented with just adding like a text field and then a select menu, a drop-down menu. They're not that user-friendly. One thing, after looking at the docs of the UI component section of the Ionic documentation, I found that there's a DateTime Picker. All right, so this is what that one looks like. All right, so it's in the component section of the docs, and it's called Ion DateTime. All right, and it gives you an example, usage examples here, like start time, and it has this really cool, let me move this over, I'm gonna make sure I'm not on top of it, just thing that you can adjust here. All right, and it's all customizable, and so again, go through the docs to see, how you can customize it. For us, we just want a minutes with leading 0, and then the seconds as well, so it's going to be MMSS. And again, it shows you all of the codes that you can use for this. All right, so I'm just going to copy this one right here. We're going to paste it up top. All right, so the label's not going to be date because we're not choosing a date. This is going to be more like rest duration. All right, and so then our display format is just, again, minutes and seconds. All right, so we're also going to have a placeholder. Again, this is all in the docs. We'll just say tap here. That means if there's not one chosen for whatever reason, then I'll say tap here, and you'll see how this works in a second. We're also going to have what's called two-way data binding. Again, this is Angular specific stuff. So we set up two-way data binding, and I'll mention what that is in a second, through a bracket and then the parentheses, and we say ng model, and we bind it to a custom property that we'll set up in the component called, we're just going to call it full time. Now what this two-way data binding does is it allows us to set a value in our component, like full time equals maybe 1 minute and 30 seconds for a default value. And that means the Ion DateTime, when you use the UI, which I'll show you in a bit, it will automatically be set to the minute 30 second or whatever the value is that we specified in the component. But also, if we use the on DateTime, that little picker where you drag up and down the minute and the second, it'll also, it's two-way. It'll also send that information to the component itself. So that's what that does. So it's basically, it's just a nice way of setting and retrieving the value for the DateTime picker. After that is nothing. Yeah, okay. So let's save that. We'll see when it shows up. We're not going to be able to see it very well because we have the background set to black. So it says tap here, but it looks ugly. What we can do, however, is set on the item property color equals dark. And that's in reference to the variables down here where it says dark. So if you want to make customizations to that, that's where you would do this. So when we go back here after saving, we can see now it's a little bit more visible. We can see restoration, the text, and the tap here. If we click on tap here, sorry, you'll see it looks really ugly, right? We can't even see anything. And we'll get to that and styling that in a bit. But first, I want to change just a couple things here before we get to that point. So let's go ahead to our home component file, homepage.ts, and I want to define a couple of different things. So first, when it comes to our circular progress, as I mentioned before, we're binding it to a percent and radius property. So we have to define those in the component class. Again, this is all Angular stuff, so I can't stress enough that you need to know Angular. So we're going to do the TypeScript way of defining these properties. So we're going to say percent, it's a number, and we're going to make it 0. Radius as well will be a number, and it's we're going to set it to 100. There we go. All right, and then we're also going to add in full time, and again, that's a property that's set on the DateTime picker. We'll say any, and we'll say 00, 01, 30. So this will be default value that we set because remember we have two-way data binding occurring on that DateTime component, and let's go ahead and save that, and let's go and check the result in the browser. Notice it now says 130. If we were able to see this text right here, it would say 0, 1, and 30. Also, just to show that this part is dynamic, for percent, let's just change it from 0 to 50, and you will see that it will the progress bar will be at 50. And look how cool that is with the gradient that we have. And again, that's based on the properties in the circle progress component. All right, so let's set that back to 0. Now let's get this so that we can actually see the overlay down here. Now sometimes when it comes to your components, your Ionic components, sometimes it's easy to style them and sometimes it's not. And unfortunately with the DateTime component, in the documentation there wasn't very many CSS variables out of the box that you could use. So what you do if you need to style something custom, because there's obviously problems here, is you use your element selector here, and then just try to figure out what it is that you need to change based on these elements right here. So again, like for instance, you can see there's a couple of these ugly sort of lines happening right here, the borders. And so when you click on them, it'll let you know all of the CSS properties right here in this section. And you need to kind of work your way and trying to find out where you need to edit stuff. And so I already did that, and I spent the time doing that. And so I'm just going to paste in some of the overwrites for those here. So We can do that. We could do that in our home page SAS file, which would only be specific to just this component. Or you can also do it in a global SAS file down here outside of the theme, just underneath the theme folder. All right. And so we could do that just at the bottom. And I'm going to paste in just a few rule sets to make that thing not look horrendous. Now notice it says toolbar or picker toolbar in another class called Ion Picker iOS. There's also MD for material design, which shows up for Android phones. So just be aware of that. You may have to add, a second version of this if you wanted to apply to both. I believe there's also an attribute that you can add to these components, like the DateTime Picker, where you can specify if you want to have MD for material design, or by default, I believe it's at iOS. All right, so if we save this, and again, you could just pause. I'm going to make this available, obviously, through GitHub, so you can just git clone that and then just copy it as well. So if we save this, and now we come back, we can now see it's much better. The cancel and done probably should be changed to white, but I'll let you guys do that. But look how cool this is. These are all just custom CSS adjustments that I made. Again, there's not many, but it definitely makes it look cool here, and a lot better than what it was before. So again, you can see if we change this to like, I don't know, something random, hit done, it updates right there automatically. Okay, so another thing I wanted to do is, because I love Montserrat, that font, it's kind of like a joke on my channel. We're going to import the Montserrat font here. And I'm setting Ion content, which, if you remember, Ion content is basically a parent element of everything that we have. We're going to set the font family to Montserrat right here. So we'll save that, and we'll be good to go. Okay, so now let's try to get our timer working. So this is where we're going to be working a lot within the component file of our home.page.ts file. All right, so one thing that we're going to want to do here, let's move this up. We're going to define some initial properties. Now first, remember we have a start time method on click for circle progress. That's what will start it. So let's define that right here, start timer. All right, so the first thing is we're going to be using JavaScript's. And again, this isn't specific to Angular. This is just vanilla JavaScript, basic JavaScript stuff, which is also why you need to understand first basic JavaScript, then Angular, and then you can get to Ionic. But we're going to use a set interval to create sort of like our timer that will adjust our percentage value as needed based on the time that the rest time that the user specifies. So we're going to bind the set interval to a property called timer. So we're going to define it up here. So we'll say timer, it's going to be of type any equals false. So we wouldn't want to make it a Boolean here of true or false, just because in a bit we're going to bind the timer to that set interval itself. So we'll say this.timer equals false. Now why am I doing that twice? It's because a user I will be able to click on that SVG radial graphic multiple times, and each time I do that, I want to reset it to false. So hopefully you understand that. We're also going to do the same thing to this.percent equals 0. And I'm going to have another one called this.progress. So we're going to call progress. Shift Alt and down, by the way, is how I replicated that line real quick. Progress is going to be 0. All right. So far, so good. Now, we're going to define just a variable within start timer called, I'm just going to call it time split. So we'll say let time split equals this dot full time. Now, full time, remember, is this element right here. And this is the value that it returns from the date time, but we can't really use this. So we're going to have to use JavaScript's split method, which is done like this. So it's going to turn this into an array. So time split will be an array. where we have 3 different values. We have hours, minutes, and seconds right here. So next, we're going to create 2 more properties for minutes and seconds. So the minutes is going to be a number equal to 1. And then our seconds. And I'm setting seconds to any, because when I was preparing this project, TypeScript was giving me a bunch of problems, some warnings, validation warnings. So I did not want to deal with that, so I just set it to any. And then for time split underneath there, we're going to say this.minutes equals time split and then 1. So the 0, the array would 0 would be this position. We don't want that. Then we want for seconds will be 2, which would be this value right here. Okay, and then we need to get the total amount of seconds. So to do that, we're going to say let total seconds equals math.floor, and we'll say this.minutes times 60, because there's 60 seconds in a minute. Hopefully you understand that. And then we add that to, and we're going to use parse int this.seconds. And we're adding parse int because if you don't, total seconds, in this case, if it were like 1 minute, it would be 60 seconds plus whatever the second value is. Let's say it's 30. It would actually show 60:30 as the result, but we need to make sure that this is seen as an integer, so it actually changes it to 90. Okay, after that, we're going to set up our timer. So this.timer equals set interval. Oops. There we go. And that here. All right, so in the interval itself, we're going to say this.percent equals math.floor, this.progress divided by total seconds multiplied by 100. All right, so if that's confusing, I wasn't exactly sure how I wanted to do it. Right when I started this, when I created this project yesterday, I had to experiment a little bit with the math just to get the correct percentage. Math was not my strong suit, but we're dividing the progress by the total amount of seconds, and then to get the actual percentage value, we multiply it by 100. This.progress then, we increment. Remember, this.progress by default is set to 0, because whenever you start the start timer, it's going to be at 0 naturally, or 0%. Then we just do this.progress plus plus, which means add 1 to whatever the value of this.progress is. All right, right here for the set interval, the second parameter is going to be 1,000 milliseconds, which is 1 second. So it's going to run through this every second, adjusting the percentage value, which is going to then, and because this right here, this percentage right here, this property binding is bound to that property. So that's how it's going to tick it 1 by 1 every second. All right. One other thing that we need to do, we have to have an if statement right here. So it's going to be if this.percent is equal to this.radius. Now radius, remember, is the 100%. It equals 100. If the percentage is 100, if it gets itself to 100, then we need to stop this interval, and you do that through the JavaScript clear interval, and we pass in this.timer. So that simply means it's going to stop this timer once this gets to 100%. Simple enough. All right. So now that should be enough for it to start to work. So let's save it. We'll let it reload here. As you can see, it's recompiling. Now, remember, we just click on this to make it work. Uh-oh. Start time is not a function. Let's check that out. So why was that not work? Start timer. There we go. Sorry about that. Let me close some of these out, by the way. All right, so now let's click it. Nothing seems to happen, but it's going to start going right there. Look how cool that is. So we're not going to wait for it to get all the way, but you can now use this, for instance. Let's make it something high, like 7 minutes between sets. Well, it's done. It's not going to update yet until you click this again. And now we're having ourselves an issue. All right, so we want to make sure that when this is clicked again, that it does not, that it does, it checks to see if there's already a timer like currently being activated and working through the code right here. And if so, we have to clear that as well. So what we do at the very top of start time is if this dot timer, so that means if it's currently a timer down here, then what we can do is just clear interval this dot timer, just like we did below. So now if we save this, let it reload, and we click it, we'll see it starts to go. Now, theoretically, if we didn't have this code like we didn't just now, and we clicked it a bunch of times, you'd see it go crazy. But if we click it once, maybe 4 times, you would see it right now rapidly going crazy. But it's not doing that because it is clearing the interval every single time. Hopefully this makes sense. Okay, so now let's go ahead and one of the things I wanted for this app for my own personal use, I wanted to also have a timer showing my entire workout duration. So right when I click the button or the play button that we're going to have soon, I wanted an overall timer that doesn't get reset until I hit stop in a different button down here. I could click this many times as I want because I have multiple sets, and this is just a kind of a visual cue for myself, but I always want this timer going down here. So we're going to have 2 set intervals or interval-based timers. And to do that, let's do the HTML real quick. And I'll say, we'll just use paragraph elements, and then we'll say, and by the way, this right here, what you're about to see, it's just interpolation, as it's called, and it's just a way to show variable inside of your template. So we're going to say elapsed.h. So we're going to create in our component an object with a few properties, one of which being h for hour. I usually don't go to the gym longer than an hour. It's like 45 to 55 minutes these days. And then elapsed, and we're going to separate them by the colons like you normally would, like in a stopwatch. Elapsed.m and elapsed.s for second. Now this won't work because these are not yet defined. So let's go to our home page and let's define that in our component. So coming down here, we're going to say elapsed. We're going to set this as any as an object. So h by default will be double zeros. You could just do 1 0, but then it would just show 1 0. Shift Alt and the down arrow key. M and S will be the same value by default. All right. We're also going to have another timer because, again, we're working with 2 different timers. So I'm going to call this one overall timer. Actually, I'm just going to make it overall, and then there we go. Timer like that. Same thing. Any equals false. And now we're going to go to start timer. And just under there, we're going to just say if this dot overall timer is not currently a timer, essentially, we're going to call another function rather, progress timer. So this doesn't exist. That's why it's given that to us. So what we need to do is define it down below. So again, what's happening here is when somebody clicks on the SVG graphic, it runs this method right here, this function, and then it will say if this overall timer is set to false, then we want to run it. And the reason this if statement is important is because we're clicking that SVG graphic multiple times and calling this function multiple times. We don't want to keep on resetting this overall progress timer because that's the timer that shouldn't be reset. So now we'll come down here and we're going to say progress timer. All right. So now the progress timer was a little bit tricky. I actually did a little Googling on it to try to get this all working correctly. So what we can do is let countdown date equals new date. Then we're going to set our overall timer to set interval. All right, inside of here, we're going to say var, or we could just say let distance equals now minus our countdown date get time. All right, so what this does is, make sure that's spelled right. So basically, before we get to that as well, we need to put in now. I forgot that line. We're going to say let now equals, and I'll describe what this is doing in a second, date.get time. All right. Not data queue, date. There we go. All right, so now is the current time, and this is basically finding the distance between now and the countdown time for distance right here. All right. So next, after that, this is where it gets a little bit tricky, and I didn't come up with this code myself. I Googled it to try to figure out the minutes and seconds and hours, the mathematical calculation for that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to paste in 3 lines, Control B to get rid of that sidebar there. So what we set is our object properties of hour, minutes, and seconds to this right here, math.floor. We take our distance and we use some crazy looking mathematical formulas that will give us a way to represent the hours, the minutes, and the seconds that have elapsed. Now, one thing that's annoying about this is if you were to save it, the progress timer, it would show just single values, like single digits, like the hour would be a 0, just 1 0, and the minute would be 1 0, etc. I wanted to have always to have leading zeros, at least two places. So 0 0 0 0 0 0, like that. So the way we do this is, and again, this is a function that I found online that lets us do this real easily. Outside of progress timer, we create a function called pad that takes in a number and a size. And then up here, we can use pad, and we can do it like this. So we're basically just taking these that were set up here, and then we're going to pad it with these zeros, and that's what that does. At the very end here in the second parameter of set interval, again, this is just 1 second, so 1,000 milliseconds. So now we can save this, and we're not going to be able to see it because the paragraph tag is black on black, all right? So it's down here, but you can't see it. So let's fix that real quickly. So we're going to go to our, not global, we can go to our homepage.sas and just paste that in. And let's check that out in the browser. It's recompiling right now. There it is. So now if we hit play or click that up there, there it goes. Now what's cool is this is going to keep going, this timer, because it's a separate timer. It looks like they're aligned, but they're not. They're not the same timer. If I click this, it's going to stop this timer and reset it, but this one's going to keep going. And again, that makes sense for me because I want to know my overall workout time down here. These are two separate things. Now you'll notice one thing that's annoying is this is kind of long now. This SVG graphic is taking up a lot of space. And we can see that because it says SVG and it's just way unnecessary space. That's because, and this is unfortunate, whoever developed this, they have hard-coded in there the height value of this SVG element. Unfortunately, if we try to reset this, see, we could set height right here in line to 50%. And there we go, much better, right? In fact, it would probably be a little bit better, maybe around, I don't know, 60. But the problem is if we refresh this, of course, this doesn't stay in the browser. But the one problem is if you try to overwrite it like through CSS, I couldn't get it to work either. Even putting the important flag, I could not get it to work. So what I had to resort to doing is I had to find in the node modules folder it's called ng circle. Let's find that real quick. ng circle. I believe it's called ng, yeah, circle progress. So find our ends, g circle progress. We go to index ts, and I'm going to type in 100%, and I'm going to find the one that we need to change, which is right here, height right here. Okay, so and this only applies if you have it set to responsive, which is in the home module when we set it up. But you can see if we just change this to 50%, we save it. We'll see that it then updates this when it goes back to recompile. There it goes. So now it is actually 50% as shown right there. Okay, so now that we have that annoying quirk out of the way, we need a start and stop button down here. It's not obvious that you click this. Plus, there's no way to stop this timer itself. So I'm going to use, initially I used just like a normal button, an Ion button, which you could find in the UI component docs. And here it is. Just shows you can place these things anywhere and style them with a lot of different options down here. So just go through this if you wish. Very, very cool. So that's the one that made most sense to me. Also because I did not want it to, I didn't want a big button in case I accidentally like pressed it. So yeah, and stopped it by accident. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. So we're going to also, let me close this out. We're going to also come up to our HTML, and we're going to put this at the bottom. All right. So we're going to start off with Ion Fab, and we're going to say vertical is bottom. So we're going to position it to the bottom. Horizontal will be, you would think it would be end, but it's right, but it's end. And then slot, we're going to say equals fixed. I forget what that does. You can check out the docs. Now, I want a way to conditionally switch between two different buttons. So this is an Angular template specific thing, template conditionals. And so what we do is we put in an ng container, and we say ng if equals, if the timer equals false. Now remember, timer is defined right here. The timer is what controls, where's the timer at? There it is. It's what controls that radial progress bar. So if it equals false, else running. So 1 second, I'll keep on describing this, and you'll see what this means too in a second. If it equals false, then we know the timer's not running, right? If that's true, then we're going to show what is inside this ng container. So the ng container element it's not displayed in the DOM or anything. It's really just there for this conditional logic. And it's just saying whatever's wrapped in, or whatever is a child element of this conditional, then show it if this is true. All right. So what we'll say is Ion Fab button. We're going to give it a click event. We're going to make one, we're just going to bind it to the one that already exists, which is start time. All right. And then Ion icon. And again, this is all coming from that Ion Fab documentation. We'll say name equals play. And the name is what gives you the, what do you call, the actual icon. So where do you find out the names of those, you might be wondering? Well, I'll show you. I think it's called, let's see here, ionicicons.com. So you can search through icons here. or just, click on, go through these and just try to find which ones that you want. You even have logos down here. You don't have to use these, by the way. You can use your own custom graphics, but if you want to use theirs, you can if you wish. So like if you click on, if you wanted one that was like an asterisk for whatever reason, you click on it and it shows you down here. The name is medical for that one, or podium for this one, or play, which is what we just use. All right. So now we're going to do the else. So what is else running? Well, else running right here is in reference to a template variable. So what we do is say ng template, and this is kind of like ng container, but it's just called ng template. It's defining a template called running, and you have to add that little hash sign there too. So this is in reference to the name defined here. Then we do another button. And this time our button will change a little bit in two different ways. Play will be changed to, you would think stop, but it's called square. And again, that's from that website where you're looking at the icons. And then this as well, it's not going to start time, it's going to stop time right there. So now if we save this, even though some of these aren't, I don't think it's completely ready. Yeah, we don't have the stop time yet created. We'll see right down there. The play will work, and you'll see this starts and this starts as well, but stop does not work, and we get an error because we have to create that stop time function. And it's very simple. So we'll go to our home page, TypeScript down here, come at the bottom, and we're going to say stop time. All right, and now what we're going to do when we stop time, we're just going to, there's a bunch of variables that we have to basically reset and stop. So I'm just going to paste those in instead of, and I'll describe them real quick, instead of sitting there typing them all out by hand. But this is all of them right here. So we're clearing the interval on this .timer. We're clearing the interval on the overall timer because the stop down there at the bottom is how we stop everything. We set overall timer back to false, which is what it is originally. If we go up here and look at these, yeah, overall timer is false, so is timer. So we're just kind of going back to the original state of everything by setting these all up like this. Now this right here, I have this uncommented or commented out because I'm going to describe that in a bit, but I wanted it there because I don't want to forget. And so we'll come back to that. So now let's show that this works in the browser. So save it. It's still compiling here. Hit play. And we'll see things are starting to work. Now, again, I can keep on doing that. Everything's still working up there. It's going to restart. After I'm done with my set, I'll just click this and I'll put the phone down probably and, I don't know, contemplate life. And then I'll refer back to this and I'll say, oh, it's almost there. It's time to start another set. And then when I'm done at the end of my workout, I'll just go click on stop. And there we go. Completely works. It reverts back to the play button. This is stopped. That's stopped. All right. So remember that that line that this insomnia allows sleep again. Like, what is that? All right. So what I discovered is when I went to use this app on my phone, my Android phone, and this would be the same thing with iOS, the screen would just go to sleep. And I didn't want that. I wanted to always make sure that this is on the screen even when I'm not using it, because that's the default behavior of apps. If you're not using them, the app, and you don't touch or interact with the phone, then it just on an Android, the screen first dims after X amount of seconds, and then it just shuts off completely. So I didn't know it existed. I assumed it did, but I went to Google and I typed in Ionic prevent phone from sleeping or something, and I came across a couple different solutions. And there's one called Insomnia, which is officially something that's a part of Ionic, Ionic native. So let's open that up real quickly so I can show you what's happening. All right, so it's called Insomnia, and you can see it's under the native tab. So there are a ton of native plugins that you can use that allow you to tie into native functionality on iOS and Android phones. So there's a lot of different things. Geofence, gyroscope. I mean, you can tie into the native phone functionality with these things. And so insomnia, of course, is to prevent the screen of the mobile device from falling asleep. So here's how you do it. And this is all pretty much standard with any of these. It's going to show you how to install it. And it's usually just 2 lines, Ionic Cordova, plugin add, and then the name of the plugin. So let's run that. And it could take a little time to run these, by the way. Just copy that, right click, we'll paste it in. And now it's going to add those. And then once that's done, we run this as well right after. All right, and then we'll run that npm install command, and it's done. All right, so then it also tells you usage, how to use it down here for the usage examples. And so what we need to do, though, in order to get it installed, though, we have to add it to our app module file. So we come out here, Control B, get that sidebar up, and we go to app module here, and we import Insomnia right here at the top, and then we take in Insomnia and we put it in the provider. So we put a comma after that right there. All right, so now we take that same line right here. We want to use it in our home page file. We import it at the top, and then what's called dependency injection. We'll put it after the last property that's defined here. We put constructor, and again, this is in that example that we just showed for the documentation. We create an instance of it. We'll call it Insomnia, and we say Insomnia, which is being imported right up there. All right, so we could set it to right here. We could set it to never sleep in the constructor. And any code that's inside of here gets ran when this component loads, or in this case, when the app loads. But that doesn't really make sense to me. It should only sleep when it's active, when this play button is clicked. All right, so again, if you go back to that documentation, it'll show you, it's very simple. All you have to run is this.insomnia .keep awake, and then allow sleep again, and that's the one that was uncommented out, so or commented out down here. So this means when a user stops it, we're going to allow it to sleep again. Did I not spell that right? I don't think I spelled it right. Let me see. We're right up here somewhere. There we go. I didn't spell it right. And then we want to make it sleep, though. Right, where are we at? Start time. Yeah, I think it's going to be right underneath this.progress timer. So we say this.insomnia keep awake. Like that. And that's it. All right, and the reason I'm putting it here and not at the very start, at the start time, again, remember, when start time is ran, it's ran multiple times, so you don't want to keep on running this. You only want to run this once when it's played, and when overall timer is not set, we know that it's the very beginning of the workout, and this is where we keep the phone awake, or that app rather. All right, so let's save that in. Unfortunately, because we're not running like an emulator or anything, we're just in the browser. We're gonna have another error where it says native tried calling. It's gonna show when we hit play. There it goes. It shows up right down there. It tried calling Insomnia keep awake, but Cordova is not available. This would actually work though if you were on your phone. And I tested on my own phone, and it does not sleep when this is playing. And then that way I can just set it on the floor. I can always look at it. All right, very cool. So that's basically it. I do want to mention a couple of other things. So for instance, we come down here to our config XML file. This is where we set up the name of our app. So name, rester. So when it's installed on a phone, this is where, it will show up underneath an icon. Your description will go here, your author email, all this stuff right here. I'm not going to go over everything here, obviously. I'm not going to go over how to customize the icons, which are kind of all right here. And don't worry, you don't have to create individual icons like this. There's a tool, I think, that the Ionic CLI will allow you to provide an icon, an app icon, and then it will automatically produce all of these for you, exactly as you would want it to. Oh, that's the splash here. This is the splash screen. So when you load up the app on Ionic apps, you will see a splash screen. So to customize that, that's here. Then we see the icons are right here. And there we go. We also have other specific platform specific elements and properties that you can look at on your own. Yeah. Also, if you want to try this out on your phone, you can use that Ionic Dev app, as it's called. But you can also run it. Make sure you save this. You can run it right here with the Ionic CLI. So if I run, and make sure you, by the way, that you have your phone attached with the USB cable, and you're going to have to make sure that in order for it the phone to even communicate with the computer, that you allow, on my phone, there's a little prompt that shows up. It says allow, I forget what it says, but allow or deny. Make sure you hit allow, and then you can run Ionic Cordova, run Android. And this is a process that takes about 5 minutes on my computer. It bundles everything up, and then at the very end, it will launch on your phone the app that you can then use. Very, very cool stuff. And one of the things about running this particular command, though, just be wary. You're going to have Java installed along with, I believe, Android Studio, but you can also run it for iOS as well. So definitely look into that. The dev app makes it much easier, so you don't have to do this stuff. I personally could not get it working on my local environment, but you might have better luck anyhow doing that. So check that out for sure. All right, so very fun building this app. I know I'm going to be using it all the time at the gym now. If you were interested in this, of course, make sure you subscribe. I'm releasing videos all the time, every week, and also a live show every Fridays. Also, make sure to check out the sponsor, Skillshare.com, to take advantage of that 2 free months. And I'll see you guys real soon. Goodbye.